Hi, my name is Barton Creed Sparks. I am a digital 3D artist and character modeler. Right here you have a copy of my resume that'll give you a quick idea of what I can't do, and additionally in the email I will include a copy of this for you to look at. The purpose of this video resume, as I like to call it, is moreover to not only show off some of my portfolio work, but to give you a glimpse into my workflow. Oftentimes when we're working with things and stuff, it is kind of hard to tell people how you work or how you show. A lot of it's taken for granted, but I would like to, take this opportunity and show you what I can do. So looking at this, right now we are dealing with 3ds Max. I am familiar with both 3ds X and Maya. I do prefer 3ds Max over Maya. Mostly that's just because of how I work. It's less to do with competency. It's more to do with, preference. Talking with a lot of people, Maya and Max are pretty much the same. They both do basically the same stuff we're looking for, but I find that 3ds Max is a little better for building, especially for my low polygon building and stuff right here. And what we're going to be dealing with here is stuff I'm using for a school project. I'm still currently in school. I graduate in August 2015. I'm on half part-time. Yeah, part-time until August 2015. Going full-time doesn't move up my graduation date at all or anything, but it allows me to not only work on this but other projects. So what we're going to have a glimpse of is what I've currently been working with. And you can see here I've got a few objects. I'm familiar with both UDK and Unity, but right now for this we'll be working with UDK. As you can see here, I've got a low poly train. I've got some stuff to go with it, and texturing and modeling. This takes about less than a day's worth of work. I find I can, when it comes to low poly modeling, I can pump out a lot of models really quick. I think most of this is due to Substance Painter, because I'm picking up on how to run Substance Painter, and it really cleans up how I go about my workflow. So I'll give you a couple close examples. Naturally, when I said about a half a day's worth of work, I wasn't including the character here. It's a 3D character I created, and I'll give you a better look at that in just a second. So let's go ahead and start looking at some of my portfolio stuff. I'm familiar with both 2D and 3D art. Mostly when it comes to doing, doodles and stuff like that, or silhouettes, I work really quick on paper. I find there's no replacement for paper, but I also use a Wacom tablet and digitally paint. I can illustrate, I do concept art. It all really depends on the role I've been selected. Obviously, the more time I pump into doing something, the better it's going to look. But I'm not unfamiliar with design work. This is one of my portfolio pieces I did for Takamo Universe on one of their cybernetic characters. And some thumbnails trying to narrow down what different kind of cybernetic characters they might have in that universe. This is one of my better pieces. I obviously spent quite a considerable more time on this. I find I do better organic shapes. I like doing characters, I like doing faces, I like doing sort of portfolio pieces they're nice and show off the character itself. When it comes to probably one of my weaknesses window drawing is perspective. When it comes to like a perspective and stuff, things like these, I can do it, it's quite possible, but I end up finding myself rather going into 3ds Max or another 3D program and building the model itself rather than trying to get my perspectives just straight and then coming out and painting it. At the very least, just to get an idea. This is one of my more favorite pieces. Of course, if you're familiar with MechWare, this is an Overlord class dropship, and I'm going to do like a bombshell right in it. I figured it was a neat idea to deal with that. Turned it into more kind of a World War II poster feel. That's a brief example of some of my 2D artwork, and here's some better high-res snapshots of my character. As you saw, this was the original character I started out with in the concept artwork, but when we went to go ahead and program it or put it into the game, we found that we just didn't have time to do the animation package and create the bones for it and stuff. So what I had to end up doing is shortening the limbs and changing it basically to fit the profile of the UDK's engine, so I could use their bone structure and their animations without having to completely create our own. Since it's a school project, I didn't mind this at all. Now that that's right there, what I'm going to go ahead and do here is show you a quick workflow on how I would do this. This is a low poly crane, and what we're going to be creating in our game is basically a jump puzzle. And rather than having floating platforms, which is what we had for our school project, I decided I wanted to push a more realistic approach by having cranes move around crates that the player could jump across and stuff. So right here, those are the actual models we'll end up using. Those are built modular, so our in-game they can create the boom as long as it wants it to be or short as it wants to be, and allows our game engine expert to really kind of move things around and use Matinee to make it. Up here I took that same project. What I did is I condensed it into one basic texture or one basic mesh, because what I'm going to do, rather than using a million different, 4 or 5 different texture files for this, I condensed it into one. So the whole thing is UV mapped to the same texture file. And rather than having 5 or 6 of them, one of them just should do the work for us. So that is right there. So one of the things I could do, and by all rights, if this was a more complicated mesh, I would make a high poly of this. I would copy it, and then I would create a high poly so I could make my normal map more functioning. But I find with Substance Painter, and especially on a model this simple and this low poly, I don't necessarily need to do that, because I can basically paint the normal map in right as we go rather than working on it. So let's go ahead and flip over to there. And if you're not familiar with Substance Painter, I highly recommend it for any sort of jobs you're doing. A lot of the people still go into Photoshop and paint their own textures and create models that way, and that's still a completely viable way. But I find that Substance Painter, it's going to revolutionize the industry. We'll start out at 1K textures just to give us a feel for what we're going to look at. Go ahead and get rid of my background here. And so what is Substance Painter? Substance Painter is basically, essentially it's Photoshop on a 3D model is the best way to probably explain it. So right now we got our model here, and let's bake in some textures real quick. Gonna make some normal maps and stuff like that. Now if I wanted to, I can load in a high poly model that I made. I can bake in that texture, but I got some artifacts here that are causing issues with it, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I just got to go back and fix the high poly if I wanted to do with it. I was just milling around with it right now. The cool thing about Substance Painter is I can go ahead and get rid of those artifacts by simply using the tools I have in store and kind of write over those if I so like. But for now, we'll leave them in. I don't mind having a little bit of artifacts. I can come back and correct this up and change it up a little bit. So let's get right into it. First up, what I applied right here is basically just a script what you'd have in Photoshop. It's a series of preset options that display this. And what it is, this is all procedurally generated. It's generated off both the normal map and the curvature map, which it generated for it, ambient occlusion. It takes all this into account when it makes this procedurally generated map. And I can, of course, come back in here and change these on the fly. Say I don't like the yellow. I can change you know, to any basically color I want to give it the hue, and that's just messing with the procedurally generated stuff. I kind of like the yellow right now, but let's go ahead and continue and finish building. What I did there was do a fill layer, and that'll give me my sort of look here going on. And you can see that it basically filled it out, but I want the more of this to bleed through on the rest of this. So we'll turn this on, and what I'll do is I'll apply a mask to it. I'll apply a white mask to it, so that way I can come in here, and when I edit this mask, I can make the bottom texture bleed through. Sort of like vertex painting, but closer to Photoshop, what Photoshop does for us. As you can see here, I got some mirroring going on, which I intentionally did to make to save on texture files. Another thing that Substance Painter really does well, and one of the programs I like, is their particle-based brushes. The particle-based brushes really take in the normal map and will flow around it, so you can actually have like fantastic weathering effects. Still on my my mask here, I can go ahead and use like a liquid stream to really get the get some better weathering going. And the cool thing about the particle brushes, if you do have a normal map on your model, it'll completely flow around the normal map itself. So they like these things that I made with the high poly that are sticking out, they'll flow around that. But let's say I'm done with that for now, but what I wanted to go ahead and do is mess with the rest of it. And as you can see here, here's my UV map. A little bit of wasted space. That's mostly because school project I'm working breakneck speed. But you can paint both on this and you can paint on the 3D model. So one of the cool things I can do here is, let's grab is I can paint. And it'll paint all across this model. And even if I come back over here and paint, and I'll back this up so I don't ruin it, it'll follow across the UV map without skipping over it at all. So it'll make the appropriate jumps where it needs to go. And that's one of the things that texturing makes really nice. I'll delete that layer there. So now what I was talking about, one of the things is the painting the normal map. And that's what this program will essentially do. It'll let you do all the normal map and all that. But rather than, if I just had a base model and I didn't have a high poly model, I would basically come in here and do it myself. And one of the ways we'll go about that is so I don't need any color, I don't need any roughness, I don't need the metal. So let's go with the height right now, and I'm going to go ahead and bring the height down. And then I'm going to use a stencil. This fence stencil will work really nice for us. So rather, I could just go ahead and start. But one of the problems with that is I don't want the unnecessary side effects. So what we can do is make a quick mask. We could go over here and make a mask like we did here and paint it through and do all that, but I'd rather use a quick mask. So I don't have to, I don't need it for only a couple seconds to do my work. I don't need it for the whole thing. So that's what we're going to do real quick. And then I'm going to use something called Geometry Picker, which allows me to pick my objects by the actual UVs or the actual model. So it's almost like face view in 3ds Max or Maya. So that's the area I'll be painting right there. As you can see, I just did that side right there, so it looks like it. But even with this, it still looks pretty good. But I want to curve it out and make it better. I can once again come in here and use the quick mask to round out these edges to get rid of some of it. And by all rights, if I wanted to make a straight line, I could try and do this with the brush itself, but there's no really need to with the stencils. I'll make that a little bigger. As you can see there, I got it perfectly good. And that's drawn straight to the normal map and the height map if you're going to use that. And then we can go ahead and export this out if we want. I can use the same stencils to draw out color, design, anything basically we could possibly want on these models itself. But for now, the basic design and feel for this is pretty good. I'll make a few other adjustments here. And that should be good enough for the UV map right now. So I'm going to go ahead and export this out. One of the cool things about exporting it out is all the options you have. Right now I'm working with UDK3, but it does, since this program's a little bit newer than the UDK3, it does have the Unreal 4. The PBR, the Spec Plus, all that. The Unity 4 is the one of the ones I use. The Unity 5 and this will export the files and the settings they need to be. For Unity, it'll have the specular as the alpha. But we are just going to use the basic document channels. Exported this out. I'll save this right here because at any time I can come back in here and I can adjust these. Since it'll save it just like a Photoshop file, I can come back in here and I can adjust the color, I can adjust the design, I can adjust the normal map, anything I might want to take a look at. I can come back in here and do that. One of the things, because I'm working on UDK3, one of the things I do have to do is export a ambient occlusion map. And it's not all that difficult to do. It's just one of the things with UDK that you have to get around, since all the other programs will include the ambient occlusion map, but since we're making our own shaders in Unreal Engine, I just have to bind it in. Save my work. Now this we're basically done with. The only reason I was using this particular piece was to paint the whole thing in Substance Painter, since all 4 pieces are basically going to have the same texture, or the same texture file. Now that that's done, and all I was doing was zeroing those out on the world space. So when the pivot point will line up to 0, 0. Come back into our UDK. So right now I got those files in here. As I mentioned, the last thing to do was to go ahead and take that AO and put it over the top and multiply it. That'll give us our ambient occlusion on the models. And since this UDK is a little bit limited, I'm only using the 3 basic files. I'm using the metallic layer as my specular. It seems to show up really well. If this was Unity, basically, when I exported, it would do all this work for me. I wouldn't have to fool around with the shaders much at all. And that's basically it. And that's how I would take it from 3D model all the way into the game. It's ready to go. Of course, I probably use a little more love and touch, but since it's a school project right now, the most important thing is speed. So thank you for watching. I hope this gives you a good idea into my workflow, what I work on, and how I work at it, and a good overview of my portfolio. Nonetheless,